Alright, here are your mid-year exam review sheets. I'm going to quickly go over all that we've learned this year so far. You may need to ask me questions. You may need to pause the video. You may need to go back and watch some other videos. And then doing some practice problems will help. Alright, Unit 1 was a huge unit. We learned how to add and subtract decimals, multiply decimals, and divide decimals. So I'm very quickly going to go through that. When you add and subtract decimals, you have to line up the decimal points and the place values. So for example, 253.86 added to 5.1. Notice I'm lining up the decimal points and the place values. And then you just add. 6 plus nothing is 6. 8 plus 1 is 9. Bring down the decimal point, keeping everything lined up. 5 plus 3 is 8. Bring down the 5 and the 2. When you multiply, you have to right justify. You line the numbers up on the right. So 2.35 times 1.2. Notice I'm not lining up the decimal points. I am not lining up the decimal points, but I am lining up the numbers on the right. And then you just take and you distribute. So you take the 2 times the 5 times the 3 and times the 2. 2 times 5 is 10. Carry the 1. 2 times 3 is 6. Plus that 1 is 7. 2 times 2 is 4. Then you bring down a place value holder. And then next you take the 1 and distribute it. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times 2 is 2. If there were more digits, then you'd add 2 zeros and distribute. Then the next line you'd add 3 zeros, etc. This is all I have, so I just add. 7 plus 5 is 12. 4 plus 1 plus 3 is 8. And then 2. Now you put in your decimal point. This first number has 2 decimal places. The second one has 1. So my answer has to have 3. I have to put the decimal right there between the 2 and the 8. Alright, next, division. If I want to take 24.83 and divide it by 1.2, I first have to move this decimal all the way to the end. Since that took 1 place, this one's going to move the same amount and then go straight up. Now I just divide. How many times does 12 go into 24? First of all, it doesn't go into 2, so how many times does 12 go into 24? Twice. Put it right above the 4. Now take and multiply. 2 times 12, 24. Subtract, you get 0. Bring down the next digit and repeat the process. How many times does 12 go into 8? It doesn't. 0. 0 times 12 is 0. Subtract, you get 8. Bring down the next digit. I'm just repeating myself now. 12 goes into 83 approximately 6 times. Take that 6, multiply it by 12. 6 times 12 is 72. Subtract, you get 11. Bring down the next digit. Well, the next digit is a 0. And repeat the process. How many times does 12 go into 110? 9 times. 9 times 12 is 108. Subtract, and you just keep going and going. Alright, again, if you find things you need help with, you pause the video or rewatch it, or you ask me questions. Number 2, we learned about exponents, powers, and square roots. So just a reminder, when you see an exponent, that little 2 tells you how many times to multiply the base number. This is not 5 times 2, it's 5 times 5. Square roots, the square root of 36 is 6 because 6 times 6 gives you 36. Square roots are just the opposite of squaring. Order of operations, very important concept. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. You need to look for all the grouping symbols first. There's many grouping symbols. Then exponents and square roots. Then multiply and divide, whatever you see first as you move from left to right. Then add and subtract, again whatever you see first as you move from left to right. Next, absolute value. It's the distance from 0. Distance from 0. So when you're asked what is the absolute value of 10, the absolute value of 10 means how far away from 0 you are. You're 10 steps away. Absolute value of negative 10. How far away from 0 are you? 10 steps away. I don't care if I'm going forward or backward. I just care how many steps it took me. So how many steps? How many steps? I don't care about direction. All right, then we got into properties. The first two properties are the commutative property of addition and the commutative property of multiplication. What helps me is I look that it starts with a C and an O, and that helps me know that it has to do with changing the order, which it's fine when you add or when you multiply. It is fine to change order. CO, change order. All right, let's go to page 2. All right, here are some more properties. The associative property of addition and the associative property of multiplication. Associative, associate, that has to do with changing your groups. Change who you hang out with. And basically all it is a parentheses slide. You just take the parentheses and slide them over. Next, identity of addition, identity of multiplication. Identity, if you're not going to change the identity when you add, then just add 0, right? If you add 0, nothing happens. Nothing changes. And if you don't want to change the identity when you multiply, just multiply by 1. It makes no difference. It doesn't change the value. Inverse property of addition, that has to do with adding opposites. So negative 8 plus 8 just gives you nothing, 0. And then the inverse property of multiplication, that has to do with reciprocals. 2/3 times 3/2. Reciprocals are just flips of each other. And that will give you 6/6, which is 1. All right, next was the translations. We spent a lot of time on translations, so I've made a chart here that you can quiz yourself on. I'm not going to go through all of them right now. You can do that on your own time. I'm going to point out a couple of them. Fewer than, less than, those mean subtract and switch. Many times we'd forget the switch part. Subtract and switch. Another pair we goofed quite often was twice and double. Twice and double means multiply by 2. Squared means a power of 2. Cube means power of 3. All right, like I said, you can look over the rest on your own time. Almost done here with this first video. Perimeter. For me, it's easy to remember because rim is in there. Perimeter. Distance around the edge. All you have to do is add them all up. Add up all the sides. Just add, 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 add. Area is counting the squares. You should know 2 formulas. The rectangle formula is base times height, and the triangle is base times height divided by 2. Look, here's a rectangle. If you want to count how many squares are in that rectangle, just count the base, count the height, and multiply. And for a triangle, you just cut it in half. Divide by 2. All right, then we got into Unit 2. And the first topic in Unit 2 was opposites. Opposites are the same distance from 0, but in opposite directions. For example, negative 8 and 8. One problem that gave us a little trouble at the beginning of the year was something like this. It's asking you for the opposite of the absolute value of negative 10. So find the absolute value of negative 10 first, because of order of operations. Absolute value, how many steps away from 0 are you? And then, this is asking you for the opposite of that. So you bring that down, and you get negative 10. All right, I hope this is helpful. This is the end of video number 1.